Good evening, everyone. We continue with our study in the book of Job. We are now in a continuation of Elihu's discourse in chapter 34. We begin in verse 1. It says here, then, every time you see this then, and this is the word, this is an and then as a continuation, right? As a continuation. And then Elihu answered. Now, this word here is to respond, responded, not continue. Responded, and he spoke. He said something. This verse 2. Hear my words, you wise man, and listen to me, you who understand. Now, this word, listen to me, basically cause to hear. In much like the old English, give ear to me. So that's the word. Essentially, in a more concrete way, is to turn your ear, broaden your ear, right? Broaden your ear. Essentially, to pull open your ear to listen. You who have understanding, you who understands, or men of knowledge. This one, you who understands, really means ones with knowledge. And so these would be a case, if you're careful in reading this, that Elihu is not only addressing Job. There were the three friends, but there were also others. Now, the others are also called wise men. So right here, wise men are all of these, that they are there to listen to what's being said. And so verse 3 says, for the ear tests words and the palate tastes food. Now, again, this is an A and a B. Basically, the ear receives and the palate tastes. And what does that mean? Then this would be an input for judgment. For the ear listens to the sounds and decides whether it is true or false. The palate tastes the food to see whether the food is good or bad. And verse 4, very clearly, verse 4 says, let us choose for ourselves what is right. Let us, well, in this case, let us know among ourselves. Actually, this word understand is know. Let us know among ourselves what is good. Now, this is a very oriental way of speaking, and this is an A and a B. Definitely, you see the comparison of right and good. What is right and is what is good. And this is from the view of ourselves. So Elihu is just telling them, you look for yourselves, think for yourselves, choose for yourselves, understand what is said, and decide what is right and wrong, what is good and evil. And this is an appeal to logic, because logic gives understanding. As you can tell, they do not appeal to a Greek idea of, no, just believe what I say. But in this case, Elihu says, just listen carefully, test for yourselves. Test and taste. These are very logical judgment words where you listen and then you see what I'm saying is right and good. But in this chapter, chapter 34, Elihu begins his discourse to correct Job, which you find quite unusual. Number one, he doesn't attack Job for accusing him to have sinned, but he tries to sort out Job in his, well, I guess his explosive frustration of why he is suffering when he contends that he is innocent. And some of the words that he may have used might have been, well, not so right after all. Verse 5, for Job said, now this is where Elihu is now picking on what Job is saying. Job is saying, I am righteous, but God has taken away my right. Now, this is something that we need to look at this. The word right here is justice. So he's saying, I am righteous. I am right. But while I am right, I am suffering. So what has happened? Job says, I am not having justice because God will only punish the bad and the evil, but I am suffering like them. And so that is not right. Now, that is the first point, and a very important point that Elihu has pointed out, that you find that Job is not particularly correct in his understanding of God's righteousness. Should I lie about my right? My wound is incurable, though I am without wrongdoing. Now, this is a bit of a problem. It says, verse 6 says, because of my sentence. All right, maybe I should just retranslate this. I claim verse 6, I claim my judgment was deceitful. Just bear with me. Let me just translate and I'll explain it. My wound is incurable without guilt. Right? Without guilt. And in this case, this is pesha or rebellion. So what does this mean? Well, this is what Job is claiming. Remember, we're still talking about Job. He says, should I lie about my right? It's not exactly the way it should come out. He says, I claim my judgment was deceitful. The word deceitful, you'll find that it would be something that is not right, something that is, well, I guess, how should we say, something that is a deceit, yes, something that is not right, something that is in vain, something that he cannot explain. It does use this word chazaf as a disappointment. That my judgment is disappointment. To me, it's a failure of righteousness. And that is what Job is claiming, because he is innocent and he is suffering. So my wound is incurable. The idea of incurable means it is very sick. He is suffering, but he is suffering, but he is not wrong. Now, that is very important for how we want to continue understanding this chapter. What man is like Job? So, this is Elihu speaking still. This is about Job speaking, and this is Elihu's explanation. So, what man is like Job? Now, this idea of man uh, literally means someone who is a warrior. Which hero is like Job? And if you look at Job, he drinks up derision like water. The idea of derision here uh, is about mocking, right? It's about mocking. It's about stammering. I think stammering is better. So what you can see is he is a hero. He is suffering, and Elihu says that he is stammering, meaning he is saying things in his speaking in his pain, speaking in pain. He's not making sense. It says he goes in a company with the workers of injustice and walks with wicked people. And this means that he appears to be in cahoots with all the evil ones because he is appearing to be punished. That's basically what verse 8 means. Verse 9, again, he says, this is Job. Again, Elihu repeats what Job says. It is of no use to a man when he becomes friends with God. Verse 9. He says, a man has no benefit. No benefit. When he, well, this word here, he desires to please God. So when a man desires to please God, it is of no benefit. Why? Because Job is suffering. That is Job's idea. Why be blameless? Why fear God? And we've heard these before. And so Elihu is just repeating some of the statements that Job has made. Now, Elihu now appeals to everyone to listen. Therefore, listen to me, you men of knowledge or of understanding. Far be it from God to do evil and from the Almighty to do wrong. Now, verse 10 is a very important principle about God. So it says, listen to me, you men of understanding. In verse 10, it says, far be it from God to commit wickedness, not evil. Wickedness. This word is rasha. Rasha literally means guilt, wickedness, immoral, right? Immoral. So basically, he's saying we cannot say that God does this, right? And the Almighty cannot be said to do wrong. Now, this word wrong is also not quite correct. This would be injustice, right? Injustice, perverseness, unrighteousness, that kind of idea of wrong, injustice, wrong in that sense, right? And so this is to basically underscore that God doesn't do Rasha, and then God doesn't do Avel. Now, this word here is Avel. So it says here, God doesn't do Rasha, God doesn't do Avel. And you cannot accuse God to be unjust or to do evil or to do injustice against people who are helpless. God wants his people to do justice to those who can't help themselves. And so God cannot turn around and defy that principle. That would be verse 10. It goes on and says, he repays a person from his work and lets things happen in correspondence to a man's behavior. Now, this one, we need to be very careful with verse 11, what Elihu is actually speaking. He repays a person, and this, in this case, I won't say it's a person, it would be mankind. He repays mankind for his, what I can say, his deeds. When you say work, it's very hard to understand things that is done, right? Things that a person does, and lets things happen in, well, I guess you can say in corresponding to a man's behavior. Let's retranslate this, okay? And causes man, and this word is man, to find according to his path, and by path his conduct. Now, there is a very important principle that Elihu is bringing up right now. The principle is this, that God does not judge man purely by his deeds, but also from the way that a man, how should we say, uh, also from a way how man commits the same crime. So we have two persons committing the crime, right? A crime, and God looks at the cause, right? The causes. What causes this man to commit and what causes this man to commit? So if you think of it this way, then you find that if there is a rich man and there is a poor man, and both commits a crime of theft, say for example, and this verse 11 is saying God looks at the causes of the crime, because the way that a rich man commits a crime cannot be judged the same way a poor man commits a crime. And in so doing, the converse of charity is also seen the same way. The way that a rich man gives and a poor man gives is also weighed differently in the reward. And so this principle is about the just measurement. Maybe I should just put it there. This is to tell us that God is just in his judgment. That a person is weighed based on why he is doing the crime and why he is doing the charity. And it cannot be weighed the same for two very different persons. So that would be the principle of verse 11. Verse 12, certainly God will not act wickedly. And this is now correct. This is Rasha, right? Comes from the word Rasha. And the Almighty will not pervert justice. This is to correct. Pervert justice means will not do injustice, right? Will not do injustice. Will not, I guess you can say this, will not make justice crooked. Okay, this is a more literal rendition. God will not make justice crooked. And this is appealing to verse 10 again. Far be from God that he would do this. God is not like that. And so God will certainly not act in a wrong way against himself. And God will not corrupt justice. God will not make justice crooked. He will not bend it because of persons. So he's not a respecter of persons. Verse 13. He says, who gave him authority over the earth? Who has placed the whole world on him? This is to declare that he, God, is the creator. It's not assigned to him. If he were determined to do so, if he were to gather his spirit and his breath to himself, humanity would perish together and mankind will return to dust. There's a lot of concepts here, but we'll just cover some of the more important ones. In verse 14, he says, if he were determined to do so, if he were to set his heart, against someone, if he were to put his heart to it, then if he were to gather, and this word gather is an important word. Gather means to receive or to remove, right? To receive or to remove. His wind and his breath, right? His wind and his breath to himself. Basically, what this really means that if God were to remove his presence, then humanity would perish together. Now, this word perish together literally means they will expire. They will expire. There's no more life. And hence all will die. And mankind will return to the dust. And this is in Genesis chapter 3. So what this means is this. If God really wants to punish anyone, if God were to set his mind to destroying, then he could easily remove his presence and mankind and all of mankind, in this case, right here, and mankind and all flesh, this word is all flesh, and mankind will be over. So this is an A and a B. Humanity here is all flesh. All flesh will die. There will be no more life. All mankind would become dust again. And so this is how Elihu is saying God is powerful. If he were to set himself, he's not there to cause you to suffer in such illnesses. If he were determined to set against you, Job, you would have died. That would be the picture. Because when God strikes, he doesn't strike in parts, he strikes in whole. So we are given to understand, when God came to destroy the world in Genesis chapter 6 and 7 and 8, you find that God doesn't do it in half measures. When God decided to destroy Nadav and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, for burning strange fire, the fire of God came down and consumed them. There is no second chance. And so right now, Elihu is saying, look, this is what's happening. God is not destroying you, so he hasn't set himself against you. Verse 16, but if you have understanding, hear this. Listen to the sounds of my words. Now he's appealing. Shall one who hates justice rule? Will you condemn the righteous mighty one? Now verse 17 says, Shall one who hates justice rule? I think we could say, will God heal someone who hates judgment? Basically, to say that God will not deal with somebody who is unrighteous. God will not deal with somebody who doesn't agree or doesn't go along with God's judgment. I think that would be the idea. Will you condemn or accuse even the righteous one? So this is saying you cannot accuse God. We have to always remember he's absolutely just and he's absolutely right. And so now he gives some human illustration. Who says to a king, you worthless one? To nobles, you wicked one. Basically saying, we don't even say that to the king or to the nobles. How is it that you can say that to God, who shows no partiality to the prominent, nor regard the rich above the poor, since they are all the work of his hands? God is not a respecter of persons. So God doesn't say, oh, since you're rich, I'll treat you a different way. If you're poor, I'll treat you a different way. In the eyes of God, life is sacred, and everyone will be dealt with in a very deserving way. And so punishment for what happens to the rich cannot be equal to the poor, because of the various abilities, and the circumstances would be different. Verse 20. In a moment they die, and at midnight people are shaken and pass away, and the powerful are taken without a hand. This is, look at God's power, right? At God's determination against someone. See, when God deals, remember what we said, God deals not in small measure, but in a complete way. And God will take away their lives as a punishment, right? As a punishment. So we should not look at death as what God has done, but only look at death in a form of a punishment. That only in those cases can we say that that God has dealt with them with death, because that is how God deals in punishment, like to Nadav and Avihu, and to the destruction of the world. For his eyes are upon the ways of a person, and he sees all his steps. Now look at this. His eyes, he sees. This is an A and a B. Upon the ways and all his steps. Meaning where a person goes, where he steps, God is watching. And so God can see what is happening now. Right? God is seeing what is happening now. There is no darkness or deep shadow where workers of injustice can hide themselves. So God is watching now. You cannot hide. Right? Cannot hide. For he does not need to consider a person further that he should go before God in judgment. He breaks in pieces the mighty without investigation and sets others in their place. Therefore, he knows their deeds and he overthrows them in the night, and they are crushed. Now, all of these are simple enough statements, basically to tell us when God judges, he is just, he sees all, he has the evidence, and he is the judge, and he can punish. And that is the punishment. And it will be destruction. And so when God deals it, it will not be in small measures. If it's about the wicked, they have all gone. He strikes them like the wicked in a public place. Now, 26 basically tells us when God does punish, it is in the public. Means all can see the power, the hand of God, right? In punishment. And so it is important for us to understand, as well as for Job to see that, no, if God does punish, it will be over in a breath. They turn aside from following him and has no regards to his ways. This will be disobedience. Now, disobedience is seen as leaving the path, right? This will be leaving the path. And this is the right path, and they have decided to go away from God. No regard for his ways, which is right. So that they cause the cry of the poor to come to him, and he would hear the cry of the afflicted. What does this mean? So you need to understand that all of this is about injustice. Those who do injustice, the victims will cry to God. You think of it this way: when God wants the society to take care of the poor, the needy, and those who can't take care of themselves. And injustice would be to oppress these people who can't help themselves. And there is no written law or code that can bring them to justice. And God will be the one who deal justice in this case. Now, in the cases of things that God has put into the code, for example, adultery, for example, in stealing, in theft, and in cheating and in lying, there is a code of law that men will be able to judge. And man is not supposed to bend or make crooked the justice. But in this case, when man does not do justice to the poor and the needy, and instead they do injustice to the poor and the afflicted, then they cry out to God, then God will deal with these people and punish in public. When he keeps quiet, who can condemn? When he hides his face, who can look at him? That's regarding to both nation and a person. So Elihu is saying, when God does anything, who can question God? You can see this is a very, very Eastern way of saying, if God keeps quiet, what have you got to say? And in this case, this is speaking to Job. God has kept quiet. You cannot accuse him. When he is not showing his face to you, then who else can find him? And this is both regarding a nation and a person, Job. Verse 30, so that godless people would not rule, nor be snares for the people. Now, this is about a principle, right? A principle that God will deal with the wicked. For anyone has said to God, I have endured, I will not offend anymore. Now, verse 31 is basically to say, Job, you are, say this to God. Say this to God. I accept, right? And we're not talking about punishment. I accept, and in this case, by inference, my suffering. I will no longer, in this case, this word here is, I will no longer I guess you can say harm, and he's talking about himself. And by this, he says, say this to God, accept the situation. Right? Accept the situation, wait on God. Whatever it may be, God will reveal. And do not have the outburst to accuse God of being unjust to you. Verse 32. You should also say this to God. Teach me what I do not see. No, this word here, teach me what I do not see, should be translated slightly different. It should be besides what I see, teach me. Teach me. Now, of course, teach me what I don't see by its inference. So this is already in an interpretation. What I do not see is an interpretation. Not that it's wrong, but it'd be better to understand. Job is told to say, besides what I see, which is what he is now, ask God to teach me to see what I can't see. Right? If I have done wrong, I will not do it again. And there is no question mark. This is to be prepared to repent. And thereby he continues to be blameless. Verse 33. Shall God repay to your terms because you have rejected his? For you must choose, not I. Therefore declare what you know. Now, verse 33 is a challenge back to Job. It says, God is not going to pay for whatever he has not said. Now, think of it this way. Shall God come to your terms? Basically, to say, is God supposed to come down to where you are to explain things to you? And the answer is no. So you must choose, not I, which is Elihu. You are the one suffering. And so just because you are here and you demand, God is not about to come down and answer everything that you have said, because he is keeping quiet. And so you need to learn from that. And so these are really good advice to Job. And I think the core of suffering comes in these wise words of Elihu, that just because we can't see, we don't need to have an outburst as to why God did all these, but yet to be able to be humble, to turn to God, show me what I need to know. That if I have done wrong, like it says here, that Elihu is teaching Job, in this case, a young man teaching an older man, and says, you must choose. Declare what you know. Answer me. In our last part, it says, men of understanding will say to me, a wise man who hears me. Job speaks without knowing, right? Without knowing. Verse 35 is basically saying that Job speaks without knowledge and his words are without wisdom. Without, well, this word here in verse 35 is not wisdom. Okay, so let me just check. His words will not, does not have insight. I think that would be a better way of looking at it. Without insight, has no intelligence. So it's not wisdom, it is without insight, no sense. And that is Elihu accusing Job. This is a very, I guess, a set of bold statements. Oh, that Job were tested to the limit because he answers like sinners. Now, let me retranslate this. This word here is that, oh, Job was tested because he answers like sinners. I guess in verse 36, we can retranslate this. My desire is that Job be disproven forever. That's basically what it says. Be disproven forever. So as a rebuttal for men of wrongdoing. Now, this is somewhat different from what we have here in the NASB, but it is important for us to understand that the words here is trying to tell us that Elihu wants to set Job straight. Otherwise, everybody will follow Job to have outbursts saying that I'm innocent. So why is God doing all these things to me? And in the accusation of Job, he adds verse 37, which is the last verse. He says, for he adds rebellion to his sin. He clasps his hands among us and multiplies his words against God. And this is an accusation. That his accusation is that Job has started from sin, which is an error that he made, and his outburst became rebellion. And this idea of rebellion is pesha. The first word is khata. This is a miss, is an error, and as he says more, right, as he speaks more, it has become rebellion. And this is the accusation of Elihu against Job. Nothing to do with the fact that he is suffering because he has grievous sins, that he has not repented, but more so now that in his outburst, in his defense, in his stammering, in his pain, speaking out so much that some of the things he said is considered a rebellion, an offense to God. And so, as we come to a close in chapter 34, I urge you all to go back to read this again, to go through it, to understand this will be the core of why and how Job is to address his suffering. Without the privy to the conversation that God had with his angels and Hasatan, and understanding why things are happening, and God not speaking yet to Job, and with Job's outburst, his three friends keep accusing him. Elihu's words are considered wisdom, knowledge. He extols God's justice, that God is not punishing Job. God is not punishing Job, and he has not spoken. And since he has not spoken, then wait. Do not accuse God of injustice. Now, all of these are really important instructions that we can glean from how Elihu, a young and wise man, expresses how God works. And with this, we come to the end of chapter 34.